Oh God, we come before you praying for your Spirit and seeking a word that will enable us to live more faithfully as your witnesses. To this end, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each one of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We are in Luke's Gospel reading chapter 10, verses 26 through 37. It is often called the parable of the Good Samaritan, though nowhere in the text is Jesus ever called the Samaritan good. He's just doing what he seems is right in the midst of troubled times. Let us listen for what the Spirit may be speaking to the church. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" The lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said to the lawyer, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and he saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him. And when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. And then he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Jesus then said, 'Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?' The lawyer said, 'The one who showed him mercy.' Jesus said to him, 'Go and do likewise.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It seems appropriate to play a little bit with the text this morning, so I'll trust that you'll allow me or just dismiss it as ridiculous. Either way, here I go. A man stands up to test Jesus, so we already know that something is amiss. And he says to Jesus, "Jesus, you say that Jewish lives matter, but do not all lives matter in the sight of God? And while I'm at it, why don't you say more about Jewish on Jewish crime instead of challenging Rome and the religious leadership? Aren't you really just stirring up racial animosity and causing people who are trying to help and protect us?" Jesus responds simply, "What is written in the law? What do you read there about how God says we are supposed to live and love in the world?" The man who spent his childhood growing up in a religious family said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus praises the man. However, the man was annoyed because Jesus didn't give a direct yes or no answer to his very complex questions. So he challenges Jesus again with a question that he hopes will sway the conversation back in his favor, leaving him feeling self-justified. So Jesus, he says, "Tell me, who is my neighbor?" Because if he can get a straight answer to this question, the man will know who he has to love and who he's allowed to hate. Or even worse, ignore. And that is when Jesus stops preaching and starts meddling. He starts with the Jericho Road. And we know that the Jericho Road was a dangerous place. Everyone knew that that was the sort of place that you just didn't go to. The right kind of people stayed off that road. And yet, despite all of the knowledge of the danger of the Jericho Road, the government doesn't do anything about it. They're happy to leave it alone because, well, it's not in their neighborhood. By all accounts, they probably underfunded its upkeep and its security. After all, the trouble wasn't in their backyard, so it didn't affect them. Why do anything about it? We have to build bigger temples in Jerusalem. And this is where Jesus chooses to locate this story. And that location is no accident. The religiously pure and upstanding people believe there's nothing they can do about the road. It's always been dangerous. It'll always be dangerous. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just natural. And because of that, and because of this, Jesus shows them, the religiously pure folk, walking right by the people who are hurting and dying and doing nothing about it. After all, if there's nothing you can do about it, you might as well turn the other way. And then Jesus messes everyone up by making a Samaritan the only one in the story who acts like a human being. He's the only one that does the will of God. Now, for us modern folk, we hear the term Samaritan, and that just doesn't surprise us because we know the Good Samaritan, even though Jesus doesn't call him good. He just does what he's supposed to do when people are hurting. In order to understand the trouble that Jesus is stirring up, I think we have to put it in more modern understanding. So I'm going to twist just a little bit and see if you can go with me. Imagine just for a moment that Jesus is standing at a rally for an officer who was shot in Baldwin. Now, I'm assuming that most of us know that there was an officer on Friday who was shot in Baldwin by a black man, a white officer. And on Friday evening, there was a rally held where about 12 or so folks showed up. And it was said at that rally, just to give you enough context, that we're here because of all the people who are anti-police out there marching. So just imagine for a moment that Jesus goes out, stands in the midst of these good Christian folk who were praying, and tells a story where the one person who goes to help the person by the side of the road, being a lead organizer for Black Lives Matter. That group of folks might just be angry. How do you think that would go over? Because the folks who gathered out there assume that anyone who says Black Lives Matter hate police and hate white people. So they're bound to be outraged. But this is what Jesus is doing when he brings and puts the Samaritan as the one who does what is humane. Or imagine for a moment the other. Imagine Jesus standing at the rally this afternoon at 4 p.m. at Page and Walton, telling this story as the Samaritan, as an off-duty police officer, is the only one who does something right. And then you can begin to see what Jesus is doing. He is always messing up all of our assumptions so that we might hear about the world and our lives in new ways. Now back to the story of the Samaritan. In the story we have a man, an unnamed man. We do not know his race. We do not know his religion. We don't know anything about his background other than he was beaten and robbed and left for dead. Just another statistic without a name. And that's difficult for us because we like to have a narrative about people who we hear about who have been in trouble. We need a narrative that on some level makes us comfortable and maybe feel even a little self-justified. Well, you know, they kind of had it coming. He went for those Skittles. He followed orders. He had a gun. He didn't have a gun. He followed the directions. He didn't follow the directions. Something along those lines. I mean, why was this man on the road anyway? We knew it was a dangerous place. We might hear this on Fox News. Or then on MSNBC News, we might hear about the need for prayers and vigils and understanding because life on the Jericho Road is hard. But no one ever stops to say that it might be time to do something about the Jericho Road. Too often we stand idly by, praying or crying or blaming people for getting shot on the Jericho Road. And no one then or now seems to know how to make any changes or any interest in doing so. But the truth is, we might not be ourselves able to change the entire Jericho Road, but we can do something the Samaritan did. Because our silence and our inaction helps keep the Jericho Road just like it is. Jesus uses this one Samaritan to show us the way forward. The Samaritan does not bemoan the troubles of the Jericho Road. He does not say, "Oh, I'll offer you a prayer when I get to church." And he does not walk on. The man does not look for opportunities to justify the hurt that has come upon this man. He simply interrupts his life and his journey, and he bandages the wounds and gives him money so that he could be healed. He does not offer a candlelight. He does not say, "My thoughts and prayers are with you." He does not organize another prayer vigil for a victim on the Jericho Road. He takes money, he takes time, and he takes personal investment in the lives of the hurting man. Now, I'm not old enough to have been around when the Kerner report was released to the United States. For those of you that do not know what it was, that towards the end of the Johnson administration, and when he was president, he was facing all sorts of trouble, and the end of the war on poverty had come to a grinding halt because of the continuing war in Vietnam. So he wanted to do something. So he got a group of folks together who would say something about the problems with urban poverty in the United States. And they issued finally one report, but there was another report that came first that never was released, although at least not officially. Both of them were damning. And both of them said we need to do something about stop militarizing police, concentrations of urban poverty, the issues of access to money and resources, and what was going on with race in the United States. And it's almost as if that same report could have been released before the Ferguson report only just a couple of years ago. We have not come that far. We know what needs to be done on a large scale, and we refuse to do it collectively. And we might not be able to put all of those pieces in place, to listen to the words of the Kerner report, both the first and the second, and the Ferguson report, but doing nothing is no longer an option. Sometimes for us it might just be bandaging wounds, but that can't just be the only thing. To be a neighbor, to show our love for God, we have to do something to help to dismantle the Jericho Road. The past week, I have heard more people talking about the impossibility of standing up for black lives at the same time that we don't hate police officers and expect them to get killed. It is a false dichotomy. On Friday night, a local news story on Channel 5, I'll name them, told the story about what had gone on in Dallas and then went to Baldwin. And the voices that they shared were the ones that said, if you were calling for the end of the slaughter of black men, you hated police and hoped they got killed too. And then for the last 3.5 seconds, they showed clips of the Black Lives Matter movement and moved on. And it sickened me. And it reminded me that we still have work to do. We need to talk for a moment, I believe, about what is conceived as this growing war against police. But we need to talk about something else. From 2004 to 2013, 511 law enforcement officers were killed during felony incidents. 511 in that period of time. Every one of those precious in the sight of God, none of them acceptable, but 511. White citizens were the majority of the perpetrators of those deaths. In 2016, this year alone, the killing of law enforcement has gone up by 59%. 50% by this point in the same time as last year. However, of the perpetrators of that, 71% were white men. So to continue to talk about black people hating police officers and hunting them down is a false narrative. It is a lie. In October of 2006, the Federal Bureau of Investigation put out a 7-page report because I don't think they really wanted to spend much time on it. The title of that report was White Supremacist Infiltration of Law Enforcement. And they said in that paper that it represented a significant national security threat. 7 pages of a now unclassified document. 7 pages is all they gave. And they didn't show any interest in doing anything with the report. It makes me wonder if we're beginning to now see more than ever that the fruits are beginning to show. Did you know that the United States does not track white supremacist groups? You have to talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is often dismissed as being biased. We also know that white supremacist groups are more likely to be involved in drug running, gun running, and are exceptionally more violent than other gangs. You might remember the all-out Texas biker gang war that occurred, where police officers were shot at and they basically let them fight it out until the end. Many of those folks involved in that shooting are out walking free today. Not one of them was killed by a police officer. In Los Angeles, we have seen examples where they have had fired officers who have been connected with white supremacist groups. In Chicago, even the mayor of Cleveland issued a report where he has seen a rise in white supremacist groups being members of the police department. A Texas Sheriff's Department as well. And to give you some idea of what's going on, from 2008 to 2014, there's been an extreme rise in white supremacist groups. In 2008, there were 149 that we knew of in the country, and by 2014, there were 1,000. A 10-time increase. There's a term floating around now in the white supremacist group called ghost skins. These are folks who are part of the white power groups who do not wear tattoos, do not go to meetings, but are actively working in places in our government, in our police, and other places that they are proud to call members of their group. In 2015, 7 members of the San Francisco law enforcement officers were suspended over ties to white power groups and being members of the Klan. This isn't just a few bad apples. This is systemic, this is planned, this is organized, and we've been saying it silently for a long time, and we need to put it out there now. The truth is, violence is not condoned by anyone who is part of trying to make the world a better place. None of this is an excuse for shooting at police officers. Because we know that standing for Black Lives Matter is part of dismantling the Jericho Road, just like working to dismantle the ways in which white supremacist groups are gaining power in this country undeniably. Following the shooting in Dallas, Black Lives Matter there immediately said that they advocate dignity, justice, freedom, and not murder. They had a longer statement that ended that this was not only a tragedy for those who had been impacted, but also for our entire democracy. The protest in Dallas, friends, was peaceful. If you look, there were pictures of protesters and police officers. The police department and the organizers for Black Lives Matter have been working together to do violence reduction. And it has begun to work. And if you take the words of the police about the sniper to be true, he was angry not only at white police officers, but he was mad at the Black Lives Matter movement for organizing with the police department. A trained sniper. Angry. So last week, Alton Sterling, Philando Castillo, 5 officers in Dallas are killed. And then last night, another man was killed in Texas while wielding a gun. I don't have his name, but we will. The truth is, we need to go and tell the story that the Jericho Road needs to be dismantled. We need to reject the ways in which even our local news is telling the story and pitting Black Lives Matter versus the police. You can support one without hating the other. Because we are all, at the end of the day, in this together. The Jericho Road is our neighborhood, even if we don't live there. But there is still a man, a group of people in this country who have been battered on the Jericho Road. And if the narrative of these two mutually exclusive things about hating police or loving black lives, nothing will ever change because it is a distraction from dismantling what has continued to go on. Since the beginning of 2016, black people have been killed at the rate of 136 since the beginning of this year in the United States. Unarmed black men and women. But to put that in context, 610 altogether. So that means we're all in it, even if we're not paying attention. Some of you might be familiar with the statistical whiz Nate Silver. He says all sorts of things about who's going to win elections and other kinds of things. He said statistically that being black in America is as dangerous as living in Rwanda or Myanmar. If you're a white person, your chance of being murdered every year is about 2.5 out of 10,000. If you're a black person, that's 20. Almost 8 times. We can no longer keep our head in the sand. We can no longer afford to walk to the other side of the Jericho Road. We can no longer pray and worry and wish that it might be better, or blame other folks for, well, you know, they had a criminal record for trespassing, crossing the street, or getting a ticket, so they deserved a gun in their face. It's time to put our hands and feet to our prayers. And it's time to admit to the places in our own hearts where we think things we wish we did. Today at 4 p.m. there is a gathering at Page and Walton to say enough of the violence, enough. UCM is also inviting people to continue to have not just conversations, but conversations that lead to action on dealing with race and work in this community on this part of the Jericho Road, for us to be part. The truth of the matter is the Jericho Road needs to be dismantled, and we can be a part of it. We can do something. And the truth is that's where the hard work comes in for each one of us. So you're invited to stick around after worship if you feel the need to talk and think about ways in which we can be involved and to do something. We'll just gather in this space, no agenda. We will figure out and talk together about what we might do differently. To take the first step so that we can honestly claim our mission, that we hope to be a glimpse of God's love on the Del Mar Divide, that we can be a visible sign, that we can be part of the dismantling of the Jericho Road. Amen.